On this episode of CMOTalk, my co-host Shelly Kramer and I dive into viral content, social community building, SEO, and why you may want to pay a little more attention to your community and a little less attention to trying to go viral.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of CMO Talk with me, Shelly Kramer, and my co-host Daniel Newman. And this week we are going to talk about content and the virality of content and how community building impacts the success of your content. And we've been chatting about that a little bit this morning, and we thought that we'd kind of dive into that topic and share our thoughts with you. And where this conversation started was Daniel was talking about a post that he published this morning on LinkedIn, and it's had some kind of killer legs, and we thought we'd talk about that a little bit. So Dan, I'm going to hand it off to you, and you can talk about this post that you wrote and what you've seen happening, and then we can kind of pick that apart a little bit.
Well, good morning, Shelly, and thank you for the compliment on my killer legs. I didn't realize they made it into the frame, but you know, whatever it takes to move content, right? So if you got to show a little leg, right? So that was actually a very nice segue into where we're going here. So yeah, it was, this past post I put out on LinkedIn, it was actually a syndicated article that I'd written for an innovation blog for a company called Rico. It was called The Internet of Things and the Race to Singularity. And if you follow me on the LinkedIn or in the Twitter sphere, you'll see I put stuff on LinkedIn regularly. A lot of it's syndicated. I write it for other places, and I'll publish it on LinkedIn because I feel like it's a different audience. But most of the time, if I get a few hundred views, it's a good look. It'll get like 20, 30 times. It'll get a few hundred views, and voila. But for some reason, twice in the last 6 months, I've had a post that's sort of gone viral. It's been picked up by Pulse, and it's gotten huge traffic and huge visibility. And the one I shared yesterday had like 6,000 views after just a few hours.
Well, and let me stop you just a minute and explain for anybody listening that's not aware of this. Pulse is LinkedIn's kind of the best of daily news, and I'm thinking that their algorithm goes in and picks up the content that has generated the most interest, and they feature it on the front page online, which is what Pulse is.
Exactly, and yeah, thanks for actually sharing that. Sometimes I jump ahead. I assume everybody knows everything I know, because it's just not that much.
Oh, it's impossible. I mean, you're so brilliant. It's impossible to know.
Great legs, brilliant. But so what got me kind of thinking, though, as I was watching this is, so you have two posts, and I've shared 59 articles, 2 that have done extremely well, 57 that haven't. And every time I share, I'm always kind of thinking to myself, is this going to be one of the posts that goes viral? Is this going to be one of the posts? And it just brought to my attention, as a brand, both personal brand, as our company brand, as the companies we work with, we hear a lot from brands about, we want to create a viral post. We want to create a viral video. And it just dawned on me again, and after watching and learning a lot about this, that I don't think we have the ability to control what goes viral exactly. But I think for brands, there are some tips and some advice that we could give that they could be thinking about if they want their content to move, which is often what I think they actually mean when they say they want their content to go viral, is they want it to move through audiences of relevant viewers.
Right. But I think that, it's funny, as we were talking about this in advance of the show, this didn't really occur to me, but I think that sometimes when companies, what we've seen in the course of the last year is everybody on the planet rushing to create content for a corporate blog or to launch a corporate blog. And I think sometimes that as we marketers or our C-suite executives look at the efficacy of our corporate blogging efforts, and we wonder if it's working, or how do we know it's working, and sometimes there are key places where people fail in that they don't use social sharing buttons on their blogs, and they don't do that kind of thing. We've had lots of conversations about that in terms of content that doesn't look pretty when it's shared, because if your content doesn't look pretty when somebody hits a share button, ain't nobody going to click on it. Right. But anyway, I think that it's important to understand that there's a lot of sharing that goes on that we never see. for instance, we could publish a post on our blog and you might visibly see that something's been shared X number of times on Facebook or X number of times on Twitter or X number of times on LinkedIn. But there's a whole bunch of sharing that happens that we don't see, sharing that happens by way of dark social. We just published a couple different posts on that topic. People sharing by email is way more popular than sharing by way of Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. So if you're not paying attention to your analytics, your Google Analytics, and if you're not looking at each of the pieces of content that you publish and what their impact has been over the lifetime of that post, we write content for a lot of clients, Dan, and we can go back sometimes and look, a year later, 2 years after a post was published, and there are certain posts that we published that just were incredibly popular and continue to be incredibly popular. So I think you have to pay attention to your data. So as marketers, that's one important message when it comes to evaluating the value, the efficacy of your blog content. You got to do that. But secondly, I think that, and this is really where we really intended to kind of go this morning, was that if you're not focusing on building community, if you're not focusing on establishing a legitimate presence across multiple channels in the online space, I'm not sure how it is that anybody's going to find your content.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and I think as we plow forward, you hit on a couple topics I'd like to dive into a little bit more. One is social data and listening, because you hit something on the head. One of the biggest opportunities, obviously, is who is sharing that you may not be aware of that's sharing, and how can you engage that? You
Right.
also hit on analytics and just monitoring and managing your analytics. This is important for the SEO, which everyone talks about SEO, but few people do it very well. And the other part of that is seeing what is the content that's resonating best. But before we plow forward into that and then into community, which is the final frontier, I think, of really consistently building shareable content, do you or do you not believe you can create a viral piece of content? Is it something you can set out to do, or is it something that most brands need to kind of put on the side and start focusing on other things?
Well, I have thoughts on that, and I think that, part of virality is talking about things that other people are talking about. So yesterday we saw, 500 posts about Saturday Night Live's 40th anniversary show. Okay. You had a post that was tremendously popular 6 months ago that you wrote following an IBM event where Kevin Spacey was the keynote, and that Kevin Spacey keynote, he's done a lot, that
Yes.
same keynote, and so a lot of different people wrote about it, but that was a post that people were interested in, and House of Cards is a big deal, Kevin Spacey's a big deal, so part of the formula for virality, if there is such a thing, is paying attention, I think, to what's happening. Here's another one. When Kim Kardashian did the, stupid bare butt photo for whatever magazine that was that broke the internet, then there were a lot of brands that jumped on that opportunity and did sort of parodies of that photo shoot. So all of these happen to be related to different things that were in the news, some of which were entertainment focused, but some of it's just, some of it's paying attention to what's trending, what people are talking about, because that sort of moves you a little bit closer to getting a click and perhaps getting some legs for what it is you're writing. But I think there's other ways too.
Yeah, I think you'd make a great point about tying it to current events, because people tend to be very, very aware of like a very small portion of current events, and when they are aware of those, and if you could tie content, because the Spacey example is great. I wrote one when the Groupon CEO got fired, a leadership article about his lessons on the way out the door, and it's funny because sometimes when you tie something that people are interested in, like the topic of leadership, to an event like the firing of a CEO of a very well-known brand, it's interesting how people could tie that together. I did a similar thing with Marissa Mayer about work from home. And I do think there's a certain virality to that. But the second component of virality, too, is even though while I still don't believe you can fully control whether it goes viral or not,
Oh,
because
absolutely not.
we've done things that we feel are going to have that viral, type of play, and it falls flat on its face. But for most brands, is it worth pushing for viral if it just means lots of views, if there's not really a conversion opportunity?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. But I think that we find, I just read an interesting article in, I think it was The Atlantic, the last couple of days, and the writer had done some research. Every journalist on the planet is focused on getting their content read, and a lot of them are compensated these days based on views. And the shortest possible version of the story is that he did a test on sharing his content on Twitter and what, if any, result that was in terms of driving traffic to the Atlantic's website. And what he found, in a nutshell, was that when you share content on Twitter, it's good for Twitter. It's not necessarily good for you, because the results of his test were that something like 10% of the content that he shared on Twitter actually resulted in any traffic going back to the Atlantic's website. So you have to think, in the big scheme of things, what your overall goal is. If your goal is to entertain people, make fun videos and do silly posts and all that kind of thing, absolutely positively, recipe posts drive tons of traffic. So if you want traffic, it doesn't care. You could sell aluminum bleachers on the internet. Put a bunch of recipes on your blog. You'll get traffic. It sounds kind of ridiculous, doesn't it? But the reality of it is, a lot of people chase traffic and use that as a benchmark. And so what we try to talk with our clients about is that it's not traffic that you seek. It's prospects who are potentially interested in what it is you do and what it is you sell, that come in, and they can come in at different parts, different places in your sales funnel, which really isn't even a funnel anymore. But to me, I'd rather have less untargeted traffic and I'd rather have less untargeted traffic and even just a small amount of meaningful traffic. So I think that people get hung up on that let's go viral business without thinking it through.
Yeah, I just have this image in my head of like CEOs walking into their marketing lead's office and saying, "We need a viral video," in like a very compelling voice. And
it happens all the time. It happens all the time.
And for every Dollar Shave Club type video that comes out that a brand perfectly matches like their offering to their audience, and it's funny and it goes viral, there's 10 gajillion, I need to make up a word because it's that big, terrible pieces of content that are put out with the pure intent of just link bait and page views.
But think about Dollar Shave Club for a minute. Okay, everything about Dollar Shave Club makes sense in terms of razors are ridiculously expensive. I mean, ridiculously expensive. When I go out to buy razors for my husband, I'm like, dude, I can't even believe this. Why can't you use a razor for like a month? I do.
Yeah.
Right? And I know that you guys have, you have different stuff going on than we do, but they're ridiculously expensive. They've been ridiculously expensive for a really long time. Obviously, their target audience is men. And men watch more video than women do. Men understand more about razors than women do. Men need razors. There's a problem. Men like disruptors, okay? Dollar Shave Club disrupts an industry that we've been entrenched in for a long time. So when you look at that and you point to the success of Dollar Shave Club, there's so many other variables that made, and they produced great stuff. Yeah. So there's so many things. So there's a difference between that brand's chance of success and your chance of success if I'll go back to, if you sell aluminum bleachers on the internet. like, and I make fun of that because we have a client that we worked with a client for years that sold aluminum bleachers on the internet. And so, you haven't done anything until you've tried to write compelling blog content for an audience of people interested in purchasing seating. But I think that you have to be realistic in your approach, and you have to really understand your audience, and you have to be able to figure out what it is you're going to be able to do that might delight them. It just occurred to me, I have an example. I had a client for a long time that was a large engineering consulting firm, and one of their corporate goals was to recruit young engineering talent. And of course that goal never changed. But there's a lot of competition for engineers. And this particular company, as do many engineering companies, had a reputation as being sort of staid and boring, and that you had to wear a suit and tie when you came to work. And some of those things aren't attractive to people just coming out of college, even if they're engineering majors. And so for a company event, just celebrating like an annual meeting or something, there were two young guys who were just silly, and they made this video about why I love to work at this company. And they were singing and they were dancing, and they just put this video together to entertain their employees at the corporate meeting. It was the biggest hit ever. I mean, everybody loved it. When you have somebody internally that's not shy about getting up and making a fool of themselves on video, like that's pretty rare. But that became unintentionally a cornerstone of the recruiting piece that we used to put out there in the world to convince people that this was an awesome place to work. So sometimes things also happen by accident, and sometimes your employees can play a role in that. So don't forget to look beyond just producing slick videos that you think are going to go viral.
Well, as you continue to talk though, Shelly, in my head, I just continue to see like maybe there is some formula. I did watch a TED Talk once about the formula for virality, and there were some points about...
Did it involve Viagra? The formula for virality.
It did.
Viagra for video. Sorry, I just popped into my head.
No, that's actually really funny. It involved actually a guy that founded a bunch of sites, including like these Harry Potter communities very early in the web, and he talked about how he built like 20 really viral sites. But really what it was all about, and this is such a great segue, is in the end when he explained it, being viral had much, much less to do with the content and much, much more to do with the communities that it was aimed at. So when he talked about this Harry Potter community, there was this huge audience of people that were super into Harry Potter.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Right? So he built this, I think it was called MuggleNet, and he built this whole community around Harry Potter fans. And then he created little opportunities for the fans to engage through surveys and through response type posts. It basically was like early social network dedicated to this group.
Right.
And so what this kind of dawned on me, and as you're talking about Dollar Shave Club and as you were talking about these other examples, is that there is a certain extent where you can control moving content to the appropriate audience. And I think that's where a lot of CMOs and even these CEOs who come in that's marching in for saying, I want a viral video, need to kind of rethink about what they're talking about. What they really need to say is, I want content that is extremely interesting and relevant to
this audience.
Yes, to an audience of people who could potentially buy my product, talk about my product, evangelize for my product, what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
love what we do, embrace us. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so while no, I don't know for sure that you can necessarily control that by putting together a relevant, timely piece of content for a certain audience that you can say that that's going to get 50 million views. Like sometimes you can't control what snowballs. But I do think, like you said, getting it in front of 10 people who could likely become clients of your business, customers of your business, is highly probable if you focus on building out content that's friendly to view, easy to share, that's targeted at a community, where you use social listening to figure out where you aim that content out. You use best practices for SEO to make sure that people that are searching for you can find you. So I know we've kind of come full circle, but maybe this is the opportune moment to shift from viral by chance to viewed on purpose as a strategy, and say, how can brands, how can CMOs that are leading digital strategies and content strategies for their companies create communities and content that's well targeted for their communities that ultimately gets viewed by the people they want to see it?
Well, I think that what we find happens all too often, Dan, I mean, we trip over this on a daily basis. We have conversations with clients or prospective clients who, think that either we've got social covered, or that having social media covered means, scheduling X number of posts on multiple platforms, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, per day. That's not social media community management. That's messaging, that's marketing messaging, that's blasting your content, that's producing probably zero in terms of results for you. You have to, I say this so much it kind of bores me, but you get what you give when it comes to community building. You really get what you give, and you also, this doesn't happen, strong communities don't happen usually by accident. You have to be strategic. You have to stop and think, okay, my client or our company does this, okay? And here are words that people in this industry use and care about. Let's go out and do some monitoring and some listening and some research to find out what they're talking about, where they're hanging out, what kind of content they're sharing, who our competitors are in this space are, what they're sharing, who the influencers in this space are. Oh, our target audience lives in Dayton, Ohio, and Kentucky, and in West Virginia, and they're concentrated in those areas. Let's find the influencers in those areas who are talking about these things that we're interested in, or that we sell, or whatever. That's not happening, and you got to do that work before you can start really doing anything legitimately in the social media space. And you got to find those people, you got to follow those people, you got to have conversations with those people, you got to give those people, you got to be interested in what it is those people say and do and share. You got to walk up to them on the internet, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's on Twitter, and you got to put out your hand and say, hey, I'm Shelly. And it's great to know you. I like what you do, or whatever. And because it's the internet, we think that there should be an easy button to that, and we don't want to invest that effort.
We want to short circuit relationship building. We think like on the internet, right? So how often, I just complained about this yesterday, and I'm not a big complainer, but when I do complain, I go big.
That was funny.
I complained yesterday because somebody friended me on Facebook. I checked out
I saw it.
Yeah, and I checked out their stream, and they seemed good. They were connected to a lot of the same people as me. Literally, I hit the friend accept button, and it wasn't a minute. And I got like 8 like my page requests from this person. And I'm like, oh my God, this is almost as bad as that DM after you follow someone on Twitter that immediately comes. And these are little examples, and I think every marketing leader out there that's done a little social kind of has probably heard about this. But the bottom line is, you cannot, as an individual or a brand, do that. You would never walk into a network meeting with somebody and the first thing you'd say is, hi, I'm Dan Newman, nice to meet you. I'm in real estate and I have a house around the corner and I'd like to take you right now and show it to you. Like, Are you even interested in a house? Do you happen to be shopping? By the way, do you live here? Who are you? Like, there's so many questions, right, that you need to ask people before you start trying to sell them stuff. And we consistently on the internet try to short circuit that. We consistently try to say, oh, you followed me. That must mean you're ready to buy. That is an engagement marker that we need to say that person followed us and they're ready to buy something from us. And that is so far from true. In the social space, that is merely like, okay, I am paying the least bit of attention. As Mark Zuckerberg said, his character said in the Social Network movie when he's staring out the window, he goes, "You have the smallest bit of my attention ever right now. The rest of my attention is back at Facebook," or whatever he said.
But here's an example. Here's an example of how you could potentially turn that around. And I'm not going to get this story right because it's been a little while since I've heard it. But there was and this is something that's kind of hyper local. Okay, a hyper-local example that could still apply across the board to whatever it is you're doing from a marketing standpoint with your company. So in this town, there was a car dealer that was really active on social and really worked to build community and all that sort of thing. And they would monitor the Twitter stream for somebody in their area tweeting about having an accident, okay, a car accident. And when an accident happened, they would reach out immediately and say, "Hey, Dan, sorry to hear about your accident. You want us to send you a car to get you where you need to be," or something like that. I mean, they had an immediate response. We can get you where you need to be. Because when you have an accident and you can't drive your car, you're kind of hosed. And so what they were able to do with that, they didn't sell a car to every person that they extended a hand to. Okay? But they were highly targeting people in their area who just wrecked a car, who may need a car. But you know what they really needed? They needed a hand. Yeah. And they gave them a hand. And they didn't expect anything in return because the chances, I mean, how many of those, like out of 10 people, how many do you think actually bought a new car, right? Maybe one. But what they were doing was they were giving before they expected to get anything. And that story about their, random acts of kindness, about their intelligence in terms of how to prospect for leads that may not happen tomorrow. How many times do you think people told other people about how awesome they were? And I think that's the message here, is that the rewards don't always come instantaneously, and we want instant gratification. But you know what? A car is, I just bought a new car and I'm still reeling because I can't believe we spent so much flipping money on a car, and so it's a huge investment for people, and it shouldn't happen all overnight and all that. So I just think that if you're a marketer and you're listening to this, especially if you're a senior marketer and you're not in the trenches all day, every day, because we realize that a lot of you aren't, but if you have teams of people who are doing these things at your direction, think about these kind of lessons as you're formulating your strategy and what it is, how it is you're directing and mentoring your team, and what you're telling them to look for or to listen for, or what a lead might actually be. Those are the kind of things that we're hoping to inspire you to think a little bit more with this conversation today.
Absolutely, and please, everybody, forgive Shelly for using investment and buying a car in the same sentence. I was told from a very young age, buying a car.
No, it's not an investment. It's not. No, it is not. It's a whole suck. It is not an investment.
It's a massive suck, but we both like cars.
You're absolutely right. It is a massive suck. It is no investment at all. But my point was, it's probably, other than your house, it's the biggest amount of money you're ever going to fork over for a thing.
Yeah, hopefully, unless you like fancy jewelry or something crazy.
Yeah, I don't need any of that stuff. Yeah, I don't have it. Yeah.
So let's leave the people, these tremendous marketing leaders, with a few things. I've got a few things that have kind of come to mind from this conversation. There are 3 or 4 parts to creating content that really does move, and most of them, you hit it on the head with your last story, are about work. It's about doing the work and building relationships. So I talk a lot about the fact that marketing really does come back to one-to-one. meaning that everything we're doing is really about creating dialogues in the digital sphere. So much like your sales team goes out to lunch with a client and they're looking them eye to eye and they're talking business. They're not just talking business, though. They're talking about their kids. They're talking about sports. They're talking about, maybe a little bit of an industry. And then maybe at some point in the conversation, they get down to business, right, where they're actually talking about whatever it is they want to sell. Digital is a little bit similar in that way, and that's really how community is built. Brands that are really winning the community, brands like Red Bull, brands like American Express, brands like a lot of what Coca-Cola is doing with their journey. Like Coke, every piece of content Coke puts out isn't like buy a can of Coke. They're telling a story. And through that story, they're connecting to you emotionally and personally. Red Bull is connecting to people who are interested in action sports and extreme sports. And most of their content has nothing to do with drinking Red Bull, but it's memorable and it ties you to it. American Express is all about business leaders and small business owners in their community and saying, hey, when you do need credit, by the way, here's a place you can go. Like if you're reading their open forum, it's not like a bunch of ads to sign up for an American Express. It's the paid, owned, earned, moving people through. So one is really getting hyper-focused on your audience. Like whatever content you're creating, being hyper-focused that the audience you are putting it out for is the audience you ultimately want. So whether that gets you 10, 100, or 1,000 views, make sure you do that. The second piece is the social data and analytics, Shelly. Like the data tells you so much. You made a great point about a post that's 2 years old that still is getting a ton of traction. How often do you actually look back and say, okay, we wrote 500 things in the last 2 years. Which 3 of them have been extremely successful? Have you looked at any correlation between those 3 posts?
Yeah, and we look at that data. We look at that data across all of our clients all the time, and we track on a monthly basis how many views for each piece of content from the time it was published, what's happening with it, and that also helps drive our content strategy because we know what resonates with people. So I think that's really important. Looking at your data more than just glancing at it. A lot of times when I speak, I'll ask a question like, how many of you have Google Analytics? How many of you looked at it in the last 30 days, in the last 2 weeks, in the last week? I look at analytics data for each and every one of our clients and for our website every day before I get out of bed. I know what's going on. So your data is your roadmap.
She gets out of bed about 11 o'clock, but there's a lot of sites to look at. But no, and then also, like, what is driving it, right? Is it referral traffic from social and sharing, or is it SEO? I mean, and that's a great question. Like, what drove one post versus another to be successful? Was it one post did very well socially, and another post has gotten certain keywords picked up? Because just because it's highly viewed doesn't mean it got shared via the same methodologies. Right? And so what ultimately drove it? So, I mean, I think the 3 or 4 parts, right, when you come back and say, we need to change the question we're asking as marketing leaders and stop saying I want viral content and start saying I want extremely well put together videos, blog articles, white papers written for my audience that's truly designed to educate them and inspire them into the buyer's journey. And before I actually ask anyone for anything, meaning before I ask them for an inbound lead, before I ask them for their name, before I ask them for their email address, is have we provided some type of value?
And by the way, it could just be entertainment value. It could be something that only people in your industry understand and it would make them laugh, that doesn't have any sales messaging or anything else. So I think it's important to understand that not everything needs to be a sales piece.
Agreed. And value is personal.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, before we say, hey, sign up for my email list, before we say sign up to get this, download this white paper, I need your 3-4 bits of information, constantly thinking about, is the audience we're trying to connect with finding value in this? Are we going to get them to come back? Are they going to feel annoyed because we're going to spam the crap out of them for the next 6 weeks after they? But I'm serious. Like, these are questions as marketers we've got to be asking ourselves, because these aren't secrets. Like, using a gated piece of content is not a secret anymore. Everybody's doing it. Right. So are we adding more value? So I love this discussion, Shelly. I think you're one of the best when it comes to measuring, monitoring, pivoting. But I do think it's something that brands really need to think about, especially in this glut of content we have, is why the heck is anyone going to read ours? Why are they going to come back? And how the heck do we build a community that really wants to participate in something versus just read one piece here and one piece there based on some sort of viral share?
Absolutely. Well, I think our time is over, Dan. And, I think really the words to leave you with today are, when it comes to creating content that's going to add value, you got to remember that you get what you give. You got to be data-driven. You really have to know your audience and target them in a way that makes sense. So we hope that you have benefited from this conversation, and you can find us on the internet at Shelly Kramer and at Daniel Newman UV, or you could just Google us, and we're annoyingly everywhere. So we thank you for your time today, and we'll talk to you next time.
Oh, and by the way, sign up for our blog. Just kidding. See you soon. CMOTalk.
Bye, Dan.